Imagine working every single weekend from the age of 14, saving every birthday check, every Christmas envelope, every dollar you ever earned, for years, watching a number grow in a bank account with your name on it, dreaming about the day you'd walk onto a college campus and actually build a life for yourself. Now imagine finding out, the week before your senior year starts, that money is just gone. Every single cent of it. And the people who took it, the two people in the entire world who were supposed to protect you more than anyone else, your own parents. That's not a hypothetical. That's exactly what happened to me. And if you think that's the worst part of this story, just wait. Because the way it all unraveled, the way the truth finally came out, and the role my grandmother played in making sure absolutely nobody in our town stayed in the dark about what my parents did. That part I still think about every single day. So grab whatever you're drinking, get comfortable, because this story is long, it's messy, it's infuriating, and honestly, at the end, it's kind of beautiful in the most savage way possible. My name doesn't matter for this story. What matters is that I grew up in a small town, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody, where your parents' reputation follows you to school, where the gossip travels faster than the actual news. I was the oldest of two kids. My brother Danny was 4 years younger than me, and from the time he was born, he was the golden child. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I've done a lot of therapy, trust me. But it is just the plain truth. Danny was charming, athletic, funny, and he had this way of making my parents feel like the sun rose and set because of him. I was the quiet one, the studious one, the one who got straight A's and never caused problems, and somehow, paradoxically, that made me invisible. My dad worked in construction management, and my mom was a part-time bookkeeper. We weren't rich, but we weren't struggling either. We were solidly middle class in a small town, which meant we were doing fine. When I was around 10 years old, my paternal grandmother, Grammy Rose, we called her, sat my parents down and told them she wanted to set up a college fund for me. Grammy Rose was sharp as a tack. She'd been a school teacher for 35 years. She'd lived through real hardship, and she believed in education the way some people believe in religion. She said it was the one gift she could give me that nobody could ever take away. She funded that account herself over the years. She put in money from her savings, from selling her late husband's car, from cashing in some small investments. My parents were meant to be the custodians of the account. Their names were on it alongside mine because I was a minor. But Grammy Rose made it crystal clear in front of witnesses, including her sister and her longtime neighbor, that this money was for my college education. Full stop. Not for anything else. Not for anyone else. Mine. By the time I was 17, that account had grown to just over $187,000. Grammy Rose had added to it every year, and there was interest, and my parents had actually contributed some too in the early years when they were being decent about it. I knew the number because Grammy Rose told me. She sat me down when I was 16 and she said, "Sweetheart, you have enough for a good 4-year university, room and board, and some left over. You work hard, you pick a good school, and you go live your life." I cried. I genuinely cried because I had never felt so seen and so taken care of in my entire life. I applied to 6 schools my senior year. I got into 4 of them. My first choice was a university about 3 hours away. A really well-regarded school with a strong program in the field I wanted to study, which was environmental science. I was so excited I could barely sleep. I filled out my acceptance forms, I went to orientation events. I started looking at dorm options. My parents seemed proud, or at least they performed proud at family dinners when other relatives asked. Everything felt like it was finally falling into place. And then, about 3 weeks before I was supposed to submit my enrollment deposit, my mom sat me down at the kitchen table with this look on her face that I will never forget for the rest of my life. It was this strange combination of guilt and defensiveness, like she'd already decided she wasn't going to apologize before she even opened her mouth. She told me there had been some financial complications. She said that Danny had been accepted into a private sports academy, one of those elite, expensive training programs for young athletes, and that they had decided as a family that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for him. She said the program cost was significant. She said they'd had some unexpected expenses with the house. And then she said it. She actually said it out loud, sitting across from me at that kitchen table. She said they had used the college fund to cover everything. I remember the exact feeling in my body when those words landed. It was like all the sound got sucked out of the room. I asked her to repeat herself because I genuinely thought I had misheard. She repeated it. She said they had used most of it and that there was still a little left, but that I would need to look into student loans and financial aid and maybe consider a community college first. She said it like she was suggesting I try a new shampoo. Casual, almost bored. I asked how much was left. She paused for way too long before she said around $4,000. $4,000 out of $187,000. They had taken $183,000 of money that my grandmother had spent years saving and gifting to me, and they had spent it on my brother's sports program and apparently some renovation work on the house and God knows what else. And they were sitting there telling me to go look into loans. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I went completely, utterly still. And I said one sentence. I said, "Does Grammy Rose know?" And the look on my mother's face told me everything. She didn't answer right away. And when she did, she said they were planning to talk to her soon. They hadn't told her. They had drained the account my grandmother built with her life savings without telling the woman who created it. I stood up. I walked to my room. I called Grammy Rose and I told her everything. I want to pause here and describe Grammy Rose to you because she is the hero of this entire story and she deserves to be understood properly. Grammy Rose was 73 at this point. She was 5'2". She had white hair she kept in a neat bun. She wore cardigans in every color, and she had the quiet, steady energy of someone who had seen real trouble in her life and wasn't afraid of anything anymore. She had buried her husband. She had raised 3 kids, mostly on a teacher's salary. She had survived things that would break most people, and she had come out the other side with this absolute, unshakable sense of what was right and what was wrong. She didn't yell. She didn't perform outrage. When I told her what had happened, there was a long silence on the phone, and then she said, very quietly, "I see. Thank you for telling me, sweetheart. You let me handle this." I did not fully understand what "let me handle this" meant coming from Grammy Rose. I was about to find out. The next 2 weeks were a nightmare in my house. My parents apparently realized I had told Grammy Rose because she called my dad the same evening and had a conversation with him that he refused to tell me the contents of, but that left him looking pale and tight-jawed for days afterward. There were hushed arguments behind closed doors. My mom kept trying to have these conversations with me about being a team and how Danny's opportunity was for the whole family and how she was sure I'd understand when I was older and had kids of my own. I stopped engaging. I had nothing to say to her. I was in survival mode, trying to figure out what my options actually were, whether I could defer my enrollment, whether there was any financial aid path that would make my first choice school remotely possible. Grammy Rose, meanwhile, was not sitting still. And here is where the story shifts from heartbreaking to something else entirely. Grammy Rose had lived in this town for over 50 years. She had taught hundreds of kids in the local school district. She knew everyone. She was on the board of the local church. She volunteered at the library. She had coffee every Tuesday with a group of women she'd known for decades. And she was genuinely beloved in a way that my parents, frankly, were not. My parents were respected enough, but Grammy Rose was loved. There's a difference. She started talking. Not in a dramatic scene-making way, just talking, having her Tuesday coffee and mentioning, in her calm, matter-of-fact way, that she had spent years saving money to give her granddaughter a college education, and that her son and daughter-in-law had taken that money without permission and spent it on other things. She said it the same way she'd tell you the weather. Just a fact. Just something that had happened. She told her church friends. She told the librarian she volunteered with. She told the woman who cut her hair, who happened to also cut my mother's hair and my aunt's hair, and half the PTA's hair. She told her neighbor whose daughter was in my grade. She didn't exaggerate. She didn't embellish. She just told the truth repeatedly and calmly to every person she regularly interacted with, in a town where information travels at the speed of light. Within about 10 days, my mother was getting strange looks at the grocery store. My dad's co-worker, whose wife was in Grammy Rose's church group, apparently made a comment at work. My aunt called my mom in a fury because she'd heard about it at her yoga class. The school counselor, who had known Grammy Rose for 20 years, pulled me aside and quietly asked if I needed help accessing emergency scholarship resources. People were bringing it up at the diner my parents liked to go to on Friday nights. It was everywhere. Quietly, thoroughly, completely everywhere. My mother called Grammy Rose absolutely furious. She accused her of airing family business in public, of humiliating them, of turning the whole town against them. Grammy Rose, by her own account when she told me about it later, let her finish. And then she said, "Linda, you took money that wasn't yours from a child I spent years trying to protect. If you're embarrassed, that's because what you did was embarrassing. I didn't make it embarrassing. You did." And then she hung up. But Grammy Rose wasn't done, because talking wasn't the only thing she'd been doing those 2 weeks. She had also been meeting with her attorney. See, Grammy Rose was meticulous. She was a former school teacher who kept records of everything. She had documentation of every single deposit she had ever made into that college fund. She had a letter she had written years earlier, witnessed and notarized, clearly stating the purpose of the account and that the funds were intended solely for my college education. She had a paper trail that was frankly more organized than most legal documents. Her attorney sent my parents a formal letter advising them that the misappropriation of the funds could constitute grounds for legal action, and that Grammy Rose was prepared to pursue every available remedy to recover the money on my behalf. I need to tell you about my parents' response to that letter, because it tells you everything you need to know about who they are. My dad's first reaction wasn't remorse. It wasn't an apology. It was to call Grammy Rose and tell her she was overreacting and that families didn't sue each other and that she was being dramatic. Grammy Rose reportedly told him she wasn't the one who had been dramatic. Taking her granddaughter's college fund was what was dramatic, and that he had 30 days to demonstrate good faith efforts to address the situation before she moved forward. My mom, during this time, tried a different approach with me. She came to my room one night and sat on the edge of my bed and started crying. Real tears, or at least they looked real. She told me she was sorry, that they had made a mistake, that they had panicked about Danny's opportunity and made a bad decision. She said she loved me, and she didn't want our relationship to be damaged over this. She asked me to ask Grammy Rose to stand down. I remember looking at her and feeling something that wasn't quite anger anymore. It was something colder. I said, "Mom, where was this energy when you were spending my money?" She didn't have an answer for that. I asked her to leave my room. Here is what actually happened over the following months, because this story does have resolution, even though it took time and it was painful. Grammy Rose's attorney and my parents' attorney, yes, they got one, negotiated for a while. My parents did not have $183,000 sitting around. A lot of it was genuinely gone, spent on Danny's program, which turned out to be a 2-year commitment they'd already paid in full, and on the kitchen renovation, and some other things I still don't know the full details of. But here is what was ultimately worked out. My parents agreed to a legally binding repayment arrangement. They would refinance part of the equity in their house. They would make payments to a new account set up in my name only, with Grammy Rose as the sole other authorized party. Not my parents, not anyone else. The total recovery wasn't the full amount, but between what was recovered, the original $4,000 that remained, and an additional amount Grammy Rose contributed herself because she refused to let me be the one who suffered for what her son had done. I ended up with enough to attend my first choice university, not with the cushion I would have had, not without some supplemental loans for my 3rd and 4th year, but enough. I deferred my enrollment by 1 semester. I started in January instead of September. It was disorienting, and I won't pretend it wasn't hard. I watched my friends from high school move into their dorms in the fall while I was still home, and that was genuinely awful. But I got there. Danny's sports academy, by the way, did not produce the outcome my parents had sacrificed everything for. He left the program after 14 months. He is now in community college studying business, which, fine, that's a perfectly good path. But the $100,000+ they spent chasing his athletic dream evaporated into nothing. I don't say that to be cruel to Danny, who honestly didn't ask for any of this, and who has actually apologized to me personally as he's gotten older and understood more of what happened. I say it because it is simply what occurred. My relationship with my parents is complicated is the word I use when I don't want to get into it. I am civil with them. I see them at holidays. I am not warm, and I am not pretending to be. The thing about a betrayal that fundamental is that you can intellectually move through it and still never fully trust someone again, and I think that's honest, and that's okay. My mother has apologized more times than I can count. My father has apologized fewer times, but with what seems like more genuine understanding of what he did. I listen. I don't perform forgiveness I don't feel. We are civil. That's where we are. Grammy Rose and I are closer than we have ever been. She came to my college graduation. She sat in the front row of the family section and she cried harder than anyone else there. And I walked across that stage knowing she was watching. And I thought about that phone call I made to her when I was 17 years old, sitting on my bedroom floor after my mother had told me the money was gone. I thought about her saying, "Let me handle this." She handled it, not by screaming, not by making a spectacle, just by being exactly who she was, honest, steady, and completely unafraid to tell the truth to every single person who would listen. There's something I want to say to anyone watching this who might be in a situation where someone, family or otherwise, has taken something from you and then tried to use the closeness of that relationship as a reason you should stay quiet about it. I want you to hear this really clearly. The people who wrong you do not get to also control the narrative about what they did to you. They don't get to steal from you and then call you a troublemaker for talking about it. They don't get to take something that was yours and then ask you to protect their reputation while you figure out how to survive without the thing they took. That is not how any of this works. Grammy Rose understood something that took me years to fully absorb, which is that silence in the face of wrongdoing is not kindness, and it is not loyalty. It is just silence. It protects the person who did the harm, and it leaves the person who is harmed completely alone. Grammy Rose refused to be silent, not out of spite, not out of revenge for its own sake, but because she believed that what was true deserved to be said, and that people who love you deserve to know what's actually happening in your life. And in doing that, in just quietly, consistently telling the truth, she created more accountability than any dramatic confrontation ever could have. I think about what my life would have looked like if I hadn't called her that day. If I had listened to my mother's framing, accepted the family decision version of events, quietly enrolled somewhere cheap, and tried not to be bitter about it. I think about how much easier it would have been for my parents if I had done that. How undisturbed their reputation would have stayed. How Danny's opportunity would have been worth it to everyone except me. And how I would have been expected to be fine with that forever. I am so glad I didn't do that. I am so glad I picked up the phone. If you've made it to the end of this video, I genuinely appreciate you being here. If you've ever had something taken from you by someone who should have known better, someone who should have been safe, I just want you to know that you are not obligated to protect them. You are not obligated to minimize what happened. You are not obligated to call it a mistake when it was a choice. And sometimes, the most powerful thing in the world is one 73-year-old woman in a cardigan sitting down for Tuesday coffee and just quietly telling the truth. Grammy Rose, if you ever somehow end up watching this, which, let's be honest, is unlikely because she thinks YouTube is where people film themselves falling off skateboards, thank you for all of it, for every deposit, for every documented letter, for every cup of coffee with every woman in that town, and for never once letting me feel like I wasn't worth fighting for. Don't forget to subscribe if you want more stories like this one. Leave me a comment and let me know if you've ever had a family member go to bat for you when it mattered most. I read everything, and I'll see you in the next one.